The Being an Engineer podcast is a repository for industry knowledge and a tool through which engineers learn about and connect with relevant companies, technologies, people, resources, and opportunities. Enjoy the show.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Being an Engineer podcast with your co-host Rafael Testai. Today I got a very special guest, Sean McEligot. He's the section head of medical device research and development at none other than the Mayo Clinic. So he does he's a quality manager. He has a second line managerial responsibility for the Applied Computational Engineering Unit, the Biomechanical Development Unit, and the Biomechanical Shop. He's the director of the Mayo Clinic Division of Engineering Additive Manufacturing Facility and oversees the Division of Engineering Microfabrication Facility. He has a bachelor's in mechanical engineering from Stanford University and a master's of healthcare administration from the University of Minnesota. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, thanks. So we first heard about you in an article in the magazine Machine Design Magazine. And the article is titled, How Do Medical Organizations Use Additive Manufacturing? And the link is in the show notes for our listeners. But many of our listeners are driving right now and they can't read the article. So would you mind maybe summarizing what the article is about?
I guess I can't necessarily summarize that particular article because I don't have it top of mind, but I will say that different medical institutions use additive manufacturing differently. If you look at the Veterans Affairs Administration with Dr. Beth Ripley leading their 3D printing effort, they are doing completely different things than the Mayo Clinic Division of Engineering does. But so they're doing, some of them are the same and some are different. I'm personally within the Mayo Clinic Division of Engineering, so we are doing medical device development and instrument design and laboratory instruments as well. And so we're using it for prototyping, for show and tell prototypes, functional prototypes, for working parts as well. And so the full gamut there. Where we have another partner organization over in the Department of Radiology that is using 3D printing to do pre-surgical planning models for surgeons to see the anatomy before they do surgery. That's really taking the country by storm and is probably the primary use of 3D printing in hospitals.
Can I want to ask you something. So you mentioned that other hospitals, not the Mayo Clinic, are primarily using 3D printing to print the patient's anatomy. Is that right?
Yes, that's becoming more and more common. The Radiological Society of North America has a special interest group on 3D printing. And so it's mostly practicing radiologists that are involved in running the 3D printing labs or biomedical engineers that are associated with them. And I don't know their exact membership, but there are probably hundreds of people now involved in 3D printing in hospitals, primarily for looking at the patient anatomy. So radiologists can see the images. They're trained, they're wired to be able to look at a flat screen and see anatomy. Surgeons less so. Surgeons tend to be very tactile and very three-dimensional. And so we in Mayo Clinic Division of Engineering got started in 3D printing when a pediatric surgeon, went to a radiologist and said, I can't see this. And you have to get me a physical model. And so the radiologist, Dr. Jane Matsumoto, came to Division of Engineering, among others, and came up with the first 3D models that were used significantly within Mayo Clinic, and it was for a pair of conjoined twins that they were doing a separation surgery, and it's very important that they figure out the twins shared a liver. It was very important that they figure out where to cut that liver to make sure that each twin got their share of the liver. Ultimately, they said that the 3D printed models were perfect. They showed them exactly where to cut. They actually, one of the surgeons took a Sharpie out and marked on the model, this is where we're going to cut. We pulled, when he opened up the patients, that was, the liver was as it appeared, and he cut it where he had planned to, and that was back in 2006, and the patients are still alive and doing well, and so it was a phenomenal success, and that was our entry into 3D printing at Mayo Clinic.
Wow, what a beautifully told story, and so many threads of conversation just opened up. I was going to ask you, let's see, well, what comes to mind is, how do you gather the scan data? What do you use for that?
The scan data typically comes from a CT scanner or an MRI. The easiest to do is bone. It's easiest to get to recognize the contrast difference between the bone and the soft tissue, but soft tissue anatomy can also be imaged, and so there are open source and a variety of different software packages out there that take the imaging output. Typically, the file format is DICOM. Take a DICOM file of slices of CT scan, and then assemble them into a whole, segment out the anatomy from that data, and then it basically gets turned into a shell. You can then turn it into an STL file from the output from the software. Okay, and then my follow-up question was, I've never seen maybe an organ of a human being in person, but from what I gather is somewhere of a viscosity, like organs inside your stomach and your body can move around a little bit if you suck in your stomach, etc., if you twist your abdomen, if you're exercising. So when you tell me that the insides, the liver was 3D printed, and then when they did the surgery, it looked exactly the same. In my mind, I thought it was a little strange, because I would think that the liver may have moved a little bit. Is it exactly the same, or does it make sense what I'm asking? Yeah, it does. The liver, think about the meats that you would buy at the deli counter, right? Liver it moves, but if it's surrounded by tissue, it's going to, it doesn't have anywhere to move. Where the stomach, the intestines and whatnot, they are designed to move around. The liver and kidneys are not rigid objects, but they pretty much maintain their shape. Understood. So let's see. If one is going to have an invasive procedure to, let's say, remove a tumor, and sometimes the surgeons, it would be advantageous for them to get some practice on a 3D printed model before they go inside you or inside one of your loved ones, can one request the Mayo Clinic or a hospital, if we pay a little bit more, to maybe have the surgeons practice on a 3D print before our loved one? Practicing on the 3D printed model doesn't really work, because the material properties are different. So they're really show and tell. They allow the surgeons to see what they wouldn't otherwise be able to see, but they really wind up being visual models rather than functional models. So one key point there is that the surgeons will come to, Division of Engineering helped get the process started at Mayo Clinic, but ultimately handed it off to the Department of Radiology that has an anatomical modeling unit in the Department of Radiology. So they have the biomedical engineers working directly with the radiologists to create these planning models. And so, they really are just, visual models for the surgeons to plan. But and for most surgeries, the surgeons know exactly what they're going to see. For a hip replacement, a knee, a typical anatomy, they know what they're going to see. They go in, they do the work. As far as I think an awful lot of the anatomical models are used for cancer treatment, for resecting tumors, and for the surgeons to, especially where it's a very complex tumor, where they have to avoid critical anatomy, then they'll be able to look at it and actually plan their surgery very exactly to figure out where they're going to enter, where they're going to cut, and how they're going to get the tumor they need.
Understood. So in your description of 3D printing, you mentioned that it is also used for laboratory instruments. May I ask what kind?
Well, so the Division of Engineering, we're a group of 70 people. Mayo Clinic is a company, or an institution rather, of 70,000 people. We're 70 people within that organization. Engineers, mechanical engineers, software engineers, electrical engineers, project managers, machinists, technicians, and we design and build one-of-a-kind medical devices and laboratory instruments for Mayo Clinic. We're doing one-of-a-kind, one-off. If our volumes get over 10 to 30, we will automatically send it outside for somebody else to make it, because our focus is on the one-of-a-kind. And so the laboratory instruments that we would be using 3D printing for, 3D printing actually lends itself to what we do relatively well, better than it would for industry, because we're only making one or two. If you're making 10,000 of something, it makes sense to buy an injection mold and mold parts out of plastic, or to use higher technology manufacturing, more investment, higher investment levels of manufacturing. For us, we're doing one or two, so it makes sense to do things as quickly and easily as possible, while recognizing we're within a hospital environment, and we certainly have to pay attention to safety and quality.
I see. I was going to ask you this, but maybe I can answer my own question, which was going to be, why would one want to build a one-of-a-kind lab instrument? And I think the answer is because it's patient-specific, right?
Well, so talking about laboratory instruments as opposed to surgical instruments or medical devices. For laboratory instruments, Mayo Clinic is a huge research organization doing mostly translational medicine, less on the basic science and more how can we take things that have already been understood and translate them into medical practice. One example of one of my favorite examples of a laboratory instrument that the division made was a fly counter for counting fruit flies. The standard of practice was to count 10 or so fruit flies into a vial, and then they would. The idea here is that fruit flies, they're looking at the neural function of the fruit flies and whether they're affected by chemotherapeutic agents or anesthetics, and so it's a laboratory work where they'll put the fruit flies in, they'll tap the vial down and see how quickly fruit flies naturally climb, see how quickly they climb the side of the vial, and with a stopwatch and measure their performance. Then they'll introduce the agent that they're interested in studying and do it again and see how much the fruit flies have been affected by the agent that was introduced. So very, very labor intensive. They came to Division of Engineering, and we designed a device, a system that could count the fruit flies rather than manually counting them. We were doing image recognition. So we take digital imaging and then run digital analysis to automatically count the fruit flies. We would be able to, instead of just doing one vial at a time, we could do 10 vials at a time and tap them all down, allow the fruit flies to climb for a prescribed amount of time, and then take another picture and count the fruit flies. And instead of having 10 in a vial, we could have 50 in a vial. So we went from one lab tech being able to test 10 fruit flies at a time to one lab tech being able to test 500 fruit flies at a time. So it was a tremendous expansion of the capabilities of that lab. But ask how many institutions in the country need an automated fruit fly counter. There aren't that many. So that's why we do one-of-a-kind laboratory instruments.
Okay, so thank you for the story. So this is happening, not the fruit fly, but the two twins that were separated. This happened in 2006. So where are we now in terms of 3D printing?
So we went from those first conjoined twins. We didn't own a 3D printer at the time. We wound up working with an imaging laboratory at Mayo to develop the STL models, which we then sent out to a lab up in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis-St. Paul area to get prints done for us of old-fashioned STL stereolithography. So fairly early on in the whole evolution of 3D printing. We very quickly realized that there was a place for us to own one, so we bought our first 3D printer, which was a mid-priced, at the time, I guess, mid-priced fused filament fabrication 3D printer, sort of the classic 3D printers you think of with the plastic filament that gets put through a hot nozzle and then laid down on a platform. We used that one for a number of years and then expanded into a variety of other different 3D printers. So in the division of engineering, where we're not using it as much for anatomy anymore, but using the 3D printers more for prototypes and for working parts, we now have three different fused filament fabrication versions. We have a multi-jet fusion polymer nylon powder printer, and we have a couple of different stereolithography systems of different sizes. And our crowning achievement is we have a selective laser melting metal printer that we have full of implant grade titanium that we're working to use, working towards being able to do to 3D print patient specific implants for use in the clinic.
This reminds me of maybe I watched a show on Netflix or something like that it was about the medical field and how if one wants to get maybe a knee replacement, you only have like 3 sizes, small, medium, large, and a lot of patients don't fit that. And this would be revolutionary in the sense that you could replace the knee maybe with a specific knee that fits the patient. Am I right on that?
Well, yes, although as far as knees go, I think at this point there is a reasonable supply or a reasonable selection of knees. And so where we live, as I said, we do one of a kind. And so knee replacements, hip replacements, shoulder replacements, even spinal, vertebral segments, and spinal plates. All these things are commercial. They're readily available. They're being mass produced by some very, very successful implant manufacturers, and so there isn't that much room for us to innovate on a one of a kind basis, because chances are really good that the surgeon is going to be able to find a knee that will work for them, that a hip that'll work for them, a shoulder that will work for them. Where we have found some success in, not in so much the patient-specific side, but in the prototyping side, is we've started working with surgeons, generally, a lot of them being orthopedic surgeons, that have ideas about better implants. Dr. Sperling is a shoulder surgeon who has multiple patents and has come up with some great ideas for improving the implants that he's using in his practice. But as I said, we're one of a kind. We're not going to make large volumes. So his best way of being able to buy the part that he wants, that he designed, is to work with us to reduce his idea to practice, to take it to prototype, and then take it into cadaver studies, and then patent it and license it to a medical device manufacturer so that they can commercialize it and then sell it to him. And it winds up being win-win-win. And we wind up helping him, realize, helping him improve the practice of medicine in his patient population.
The one thing that I don't understand is if there are already companies that are very successful at providing the knees, the hips, what are we using the titanium custom one-off parts for, to replace what parts in the body?
So the first part we're looking at is mandible plating. So it's anytime there's a lot of patient variation. You think about the mandible, the jaw. Everybody's jaw is shaped differently. Now, Mayo has a fairly large practice, a couple hundred cases a year of tumors in the jaw, in the mandible, that have to be resected, that have to be removed. And right now, the Department of Radiology, the Anatomical Modeling Unit, will take images we'll take the images, we'll create 3D models. They'll sit down with the surgeon and do pre-surgical, virtual surgical planning to decide where they're going to cut the bone to resect the tumor. They'll also they use the fibula as a spare piece of bone, and so they will take a section of the patient's fibula, they're the smaller, narrower shin bone, and they will cut it to fit into the jaw, and then they'll use a plate to hold all of the pieces together, to hold the remaining jaw pieces together, and the filler, the replacement bone, holding everything together and in alignment. And it's really just a plating version. It's not providing long-term strength or structure, but it's allowing the bones to fuse and to grow and to heal in proper alignment. Now, they can use stock plates for that, and sometimes if time is critical, they'll even take a case where they would prefer to use a patient-specific plate, and they will actually bend it they'll use a stock plate and they'll bend it in the operating room to fit. Well, that's not optimal. What's best is designing in advance a custom plate. There are companies that do this, that we can go outside and purchase these patient-specific implants. We believe that we can cut the timeline down so that it meets Mayo Clinic's needs. Mayo Clinic is a destination medical center, so people come here to Mayo Clinic or whether it's the original Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, or one of the other destination centers in Phoenix or Jacksonville. People travel to visit Mayo Clinic, and so the sort of the ideal, the perfect case model of care is the patient shows up on Monday for some testing. They see specialists on Monday or Tuesday. They get diagnosed. A course of treatment is defined, and by Thursday or Friday, they're in surgery. Now, the current standard of care for patient-specific implants, the timeline doesn't support that. We believe that we can take that within 5 days, the patient can be imaged. The anatomical modeling unit in radiology can do their virtual surgical planning and can provide us with the requirements for what they need in an implant. We would design that implant, print it, post-process it, and deliver it to sterilization, suitable for surgery on Friday.
That's a great value proposition for a patient. Quick turnaround.
Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to take a quick moment to mention that the Being an Engineer podcast is brought to you by Pipeline Design and Engineering, located here in Phoenix, Arizona. Pipeline partners with medical and other medical device engineering teams who need turnkey equipment such as cycle test machines, custom test fixtures, automation equipment, assembly jigs, inspection stations, and more. You can find us on the web at teampipeline.us. Now, I'm here with Sean McEligot. And I was telling Sean, I asked him before the interview started if he could tell me how to pronounce his name. And he told me that if you pronounce every letter on his name, you're good. And then I mentioned that I'm bilingual in Spanish, so it's not an issue for me. So I wanted to talk to you about all the things that you do at Mayo Clinic. It says that you are involved in the Applied Computational Engineering Unit, the Biomechanical Development Unit, the Biomechanical Shop, the Engineering Additive Manufacturing Facility, and the Engineering Microfabrication Facility. It sounds like you're 5 people into one. How do you manage all these moving parts?
A key part of it is having good people working with you. And so I'm director of the additive manufacturing facility, but we have a unit manager over the mechanical engineering unit, and the additive manufacturing, the staff for the additive manufacturing facility report to her. Talking about doing patient-specific implants, I'm participating in that. I'm the management sponsor, but we have a project manager who is tasked with that, and we've got a team of 6 or 8 who are actively working on that. So it really is a matter of being able to have great people working for you and empowering them to do their work.
Absolutely. Well, this is a perfect segue because you mentioned that the Mayo Clinic is the destination for a quick turnaround and some of the best treatment in the entire world. So I can imagine this is probably not a question that you get often asked on podcasts, but if I'm in your shoes and I'm working my way up as an engineer and I apply to the Mayo Clinic and I get hired, what was the moment like when you got the call from the Mayo Clinic telling you that you were hired?
It was great, although I'm not sure that I really realized how lucky I was and how much I loved being at the Mayo Clinic, right away. Because before I was at the Mayo Clinic, I was working in industry, in the medical device industry, as a medical device design engineer and project manager and manager, and in working in the device industry or in industry in general, I think you so often you get onto one product line, you know that product line, next year I'm going to be designing a smaller one of these or a bigger one of these or a dual version of this or a plastic or a titanium. And so you can really see the writing on the wall, years and years in the future, where Mayo Clinic, as I said, we're doing one-of-a-kind medical devices and laboratory instruments. And at any time among our 70 people, we have 30 projects going on, and so it really is a matter of being able to not getting stuck in a rut, but being able to find to help in many, many different ways. Another aspect of working at Mayo Clinic was that, again, being out in the medical device industry, it's a challenge to get input from doctors, and it's a challenge to be able to see products in use. And working within the Mayo Clinic, we're Mayo Clinic employees. We are already covered by the informed consent that the patients sign. So if we're working with a surgeon and we need to observe a surgery, it's simply a matter of the surgeon calling up nursing and say, help this engineer get into the operating room for me. And so it's really it's wonderful in that regard. And as far as getting doctors' input, again, in medical device industry, you go to conferences, you try to get time with doctors, you pay doctors to talk to you. working at the Mayo Clinic, they're coming and asking for our help, asking us to help them. And so it really is, they have time. We're helping them achieve what they want to achieve.
When you mentioned that the engineers were already covered by the patient consent, what's the exact term?
Informed consent.
Informed consent, and how it removes all these barriers and allows the engineers to be present in the surgery. It reminds me of a core value here at Pipeline that's called governed by productivity and not bureaucracy. So it's like all that red tape is gone, and you just get your hands, you can go to work and get the information you need. So I think that's pretty cool. On the other side, let's say that there are engineers interested in helping the Mayo Clinic's vision. What are some things that the Mayo Clinic may look for in the engineers that they hire?
The key thing is skill, expertise, knowledge in the discipline that they've been trained in. And so for the mechanical engineers, I'm now second line over the mechanical engineers. I was the first line mechanical engineering manager and hired mechanical engineers. Some of the mechanical engineers are actually biomedical engineers who have who had a strong foundation in mechanical design, but they're working at Mayo Clinic. The ideal candidate is someone who has experience with experience and interest in the discipline, so mechanical design, electrical design, software design, but also has background and interest in the biology and medical side of things. And so it's a special person that is perfect. But there again, my training, as you said at the beginning, I'm a mechanical engineer and I have a master's degree in healthcare administration. Neither one of those teaches you all the things that one needs to know to be a medical device design engineer. And so some of it is on the job, and a lot of it is working with people that know what they're doing, and then a lot of it is also classes and seminars and whatnot of learning. They didn't teach me about the characterization of sterilization in college, and they didn't teach me about sterilization validation in college, and they didn't teach me about biocompatibility in college. But these are all things that I've had to pick up along the way. And so we know that the most important thing in hiring somebody is somebody that is smart, adaptable, and that cares. And willing to learn. That isn't. We don't want people that feel most comfortable being in a rut. We want people who want to learn.
That's exciting. Let's see. You mentioned. Let's see that. A lot of our listeners are still engineers in college. A lot of them are mechanical who listen to our podcast. And you mentioned that school is not going to teach you everything, of course, that you need to know in order to maybe contribute at the Mayo Clinic. But there's time. Maybe let's say that there's a sophomore listening to this right now. What's something that sophomore can do to start building that resume or that skill set so when they graduate, they're a more attractive applicant for the Mayo Clinic?
Well, and I guess not necessarily just the Mayo Clinic, but the medical device industry in general, I think it would apply to as well. Take classes in biomedical. So I would encourage that mechanical engineer to continue and graduate as a mechanical engineer. And if they're interested in design, focus on the design courses in mechanical engineering, but also take classes in biomedical engineering, whether it's just being able to just having some background in it, or getting a minor or a dual major. We have one of the engineers that works in Division of Engineering has a bachelor's in mechanical and a master's in biomedical. And so that's an option as well. But so I'd say get coursework. I think if you're interested in biomedical, there are biomedical engineering clubs at a lot of or societies at a lot of universities. Get engaged with that as you're picking your design projects. Pick medical design projects if they're available, so that you can get into that. Look for internships, whether it's at the Mayo Clinic we have internships, but we only have 1 or 2 mechanical engineering internships, so it's very selective. But look towards medical device companies and just find whatever internships might align with your goal of being a medical device design engineer.
Perfect. Is there anything that I should have asked you that I haven't asked you?
I can't think of anything.
Okay.
No.
I guess I've done a good job then. So, how can people reach you?
I am on LinkedIn. And so I guess I would say if you're interested in connecting with me, let me know that you've that you've heard me on the podcast, and express your interest. I have financial advisors, so I don't need more financial advisors trying to connect with me on LinkedIn. But if you're interested in medical device, if you're interested in 3D printing, if you're a college student in mechanical engineering or any of the engineering disciplines, I'd certainly be happy to be connected on LinkedIn. So just send me a LinkedIn request, and we can move from there.
What a beautiful outro. All right, Sean. Well, thank you so much for being on the show.
Great. Thank you.
I'm Aaron Monker, founder of Pipeline Design and Engineering. If you liked what you heard today, please share the episode. To learn how your team can leverage our team's expertise developing turnkey equipment, custom fixtures, and automated machines, and with product design, visit us at teampipeline.us. Thanks for listening.